I live here in New York City. I like it, but I don't like the nanny state part. New York has lots of restrictions on freedom. Forced unionization, rent control, strict gun laws, high taxes. Some of that's just New York City, but New York State isn't so great either. And a new study by the Mercatus Center, Freedom in the 50 States, ranks New York dead last. This year, Mercatus made a video about their contest.
Every 2 years, all 50 states convene to compete for the title of Most Free State. The winner will receive more residents, fewer burdensome rules that slow growth, and fewer nanny state regulations.
I'm wondering how New York will do. They don't look too good.
No, sadly. Veronique DeRougy is an economist at Mercatus, and Will Ruger wrote that study. So, Will, New York was the worst. What was the best?
North Dakota was the best, actually, followed by South Dakota, Tennessee, New Hampshire, and Oklahoma, with Idaho right behind.
But in terms of personal freedom, you have another ranking, which the winner was Alaska, Nevada, Maine, New Mexico, New Hampshire. So you break it down by economics and personal freedom.
Exactly. And in economics, it's fiscal and regulatory policy. And in personal freedom, we talk about things like freedom from incarceration and arrest for victimless crimes, gun control, education policy, marriage policy, even travel freedoms.
So you're saying if they allow gay marriage, that's good. You're making value judgments here.
Sure. I mean, freedom is a moral concept, but we can study it scientifically to see which states are more or less free.
And Veronique, I don't see people wanting to move to South and North Dakota that much.
But do you know what's actually really interesting about this study is that it shows that people follow jobs and jobs follow freedom, economic freedom, regulatory freedom, but also personal freedom. And so basically there's a connection, and it's indirect, but it's there.
And some states have, 18 states increased freedom since the last study. So that's not what you see when you watch the politicians add piles of regulation.
It's all relative, right? I mean, what matters is, like, for instance, like New York has seen a lot of migration. We've seen a lot of migration out of New York. I mean, New York is still growing, but it's really actually growing at one of the slowest, right, of all the states.
One of the comparisons you guys make is comparing the burden of regulation. So let's play more of your video.
On to the regulatory wall climb. Wow, Indiana and Delaware are rocketing up the wall. West Virginia's liability system and New Jersey's abuse of property rights are leaving them stuck in molasses. I think California is going to fall. Those labor laws and that liability system is too much.
Labor laws and liability, you don't even mention all the crazy environmental laws in California that make power cost more.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about California is what don't they regulate, right? I mean, everything from their liability system being problematic to even authorizing rent control, which only a few states do. It's a leftover from World War II. When you compare it to states like Indiana, where they're relatively free, Indiana is the #1 state in terms of regulatory freedom. It has, land use planning is light, occupational licensing is pretty minimal. They have a great liability system. And what we've seen is that actually regulatory policy tracks with personal income growth. So there's a real cost for California's regulations and a real benefit for a state like Indiana.
So I mean, what goes on in places like California? They have the coastline. They have awesome weather. It's beautiful. It's like you get comfortable and then you just get smug and the politicians get arrogant. Do you have a theory?
Well, I mean, all kinds of things are going on there. It's a complicated story. But what's amazing is that given all those advantages you listed, people are still voting with their feet to get out of there. And California is a wonderful place, right? Is there hardly any place better than San Diego, in my view, in terms of the weather and all the amenities? And yet you're seeing over 4% of the population escaping that state to neighboring states that are more free, including states that are personally free like Nevada.
And it's not, I mean, California is not a top destination for immigrants anymore, legal or illegal, and that tells you something. When you have a lot of regulations, whatever form they take, it kills jobs, and then people don't want to go there.
Yeah, and look at Illinois and Indiana for a comparison. They're right next door. Illinois even has one of the greatest cities in the country in Chicago, and yet people are fleeing Illinois.
It's interesting on your rating, some states are bad for personal freedom, but good in other areas. South Dakota is second overall, ranks 46th in personal freedom.
Right. I mean, South Dakota has great fiscal policy, but it really needs to make improvements in the personal freedom area. It has really high victimless crime, arrest, and incarceration rates. It authorizes sobriety checkpoints. Things like that are not so great. And then there are some states actually that are kind of purple states like New Hampshire, Colorado, even Georgia, Missouri, where they actually do well in both areas. And so those are the places I see as being really attractive to people in the future as we see people desirous of freedom and voting with their feet.
It's good.
Well, thank you, Will and Veronique. This is a valuable study for anybody who's thinking of starting anew in some new state.